back Silvia Lopez to discuss her journey coming from Cuba to the United States. And we're going to just kind of dive in and see what's the same, what's the difference, her perspective. And as she was discussing before I hit record, which I feel is very important to capture, how her perception changed as she got older and realized what her parents did and how they got there. So Sylvia, I can't thank you enough. I know it's going to be great. You're so insightful. You're so curious. You're so eloquent. So I'm going to leave the floor to you and I'll interject when I need to.
That's fine. Thank you for having me. I'm
Always.
delighted. I'm delighted to be. I think your podcasts are so wonderful,
Oh,
and I'm
thank
just
you.
delighted that you asked me. I'm very honored that you asked
Thank
me.
you.
It's a different type of podcast for me because usually they are about the books. They're book
Mm-hmm.
related, but this one is personal. So I think it's going to be very interesting. I've been giving it a lot of thought.
Oh, you're so kind. And it's an honor to have you. And I feel like you have such valuable information. And I think it's also, your books were so much of them are informed by your experience and, growing up Cuban American. And I think you can't have this podcast without knowing that that's a huge part of who you are. You were a librarian for years. You took your passion for words and writing into books. That's how we got acquainted, for anybody who doesn't know. So I want to focus on you and your story, which is I know is going to be incredible. So let's go back to some of your earliest memories, those of living in Cuba. What are they?
Okay, I I left Cuba with my parents when I was a week before my 10th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
So my early childhood was all spent there. And excuse me.
No pasa
Um,
nada.
I have a lot of memories that are very tiny. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think children's memories from when they're little, they're kind of like snapshots or still pictures, you know? You have a
Yeah.
picture of something, but events. I mean, I lived through the Cuban Revolution and I
Mm.
was a child and it came through my town. It came through my grandparents' town, the march to Havana. And it was very interesting. My father had a ham radio of sorts,
Oh, wow.
and we would listen to the progress of how they were coming from the mountains in the east, and they were, taking over one town. What they would do, what the guerrillas would do, they would take over the town, like the city hall and whatever the the where the militia was. I mean, where the police was, the police station. And they would take over that, and usually very bloodless for the most part, but then my father would mark it off on a map, and it was
Wow.
going towards Havana. Um, all of that was fine. For me, it was exciting. I realized later how this was betrayed. My father I wouldn't say he was a supporter of the revolution, but he was a person who believed in change. There was change needed in Cuba. Cuba was one of the richest countries, as tiny as it is, one of the richest countries per capita in the hemisphere. We had a lower infant mortality than the United States. We had a per capita income, very high, but there was also a lot of corruption, and that corruption, um, I mean, those are deep political issues, but that corruption needed change. That really did, and he believed in the change, but which I think made it harder later because I
Yes.
think he felt like it was betrayed. All of that went nowhere because we just exchanged one tyranny or one dictatorship for another one that was even worse. So my to get back to the question, I have some beautiful memories of my house, big house. I was an only child. So I entertained myself. I was a reader and a drawer and a whatever. And I entertained myself a lot, played a lot, did a lot. Had some cousins in the town that was not too far away. For my mother, it was like the other part of the world. It was only an hour away. but that's the roads were not what they are today. So, and then at my grandparents' houses, I had a set of grandparents living on the coast. They actually lived on a pier, at the
Oh,
end of a
wow.
pier. If you dropped something on their floor and it went through the floorboards, you lost it because underneath was water. So that was
Oh,
interesting, and there was a very seafaring life because my grandfather had a import export business, and so
okay.
he that was interesting for with big ships that could not come into Havana Harbor. So that was one side of my family. The other side of the family was in another town, and that I remember, because those were my cousins, and not having brothers and sisters, I was close to my three cousins that were there. So there was a lot of games and playing and things like that. I remember my grandfather on my mother's side was a very elegant man, and he wore a guayabera. I don't know if you know what that is, Brianna. Okay, that is the Cuban, the typical Cuban. It's not Cuban. South Americans also use it. That is that linen shirt.
Mhm.
The linen
Okay.
shirt, very very starched. He wore one every day with a straw hat every single day.
Oh.
And I was about 3, and he would go to a nearby, I guess it was a general store, but it also had a little bar, and he would have a tiny little bit of anisette, licorice, every
Uh-huh.
day. So he'd take me, and I could dip my finger there and then lick it, which when my mother found out, that was the end of that
End of that.
adventure. But I remember that. That was a lot of fun. So those are my early, but they're like little, like I said, little tiny
Yeah.
videos, 5 seconds, 3 seconds, my bicycle, whatever. But that's what
Yeah.
it was.
What did
Yes.
you appreciate about your childhood on this
I
very
appreciated the
vivacious island?
fact, yeah, yeah. I appreciated those things that I had a big house and a big yard,
Hmm.
lots of fruit trees and things. And I was a very much a tomboy, and I climbed trees, yes. And
Can relate.
my shins were always
Yeah.
full of that red mercurochrome that they don't use anymore. And I was always playing. And then then I was in school. I enjoyed school a lot. I was in a Catholic school, and my mom, uh, she sent me there to kindergarten, and I didn't like it. I cried every single day. So she went, I know, and then threw up all over myself. So then, so one day she went, and she went into the classroom, and she saw the sister, the nun, she actually had stood the kids who were crying, that she had put them in a corner and put a cork in their mouth, like a bottle cork. Yes. Well, these were days before pedagogical, teachings. And we were all standing there drooling, and she took me out of that school so fast. So I went to a little school in the neighborhood for a couple of years, and then I went back when I was a little older. So then I enjoyed it. It was fine. I liked my school. So those are the things that I enjoyed. I enjoyed being with my family. I enjoyed, my house, going on boats because of my grandparents' business. Like we went fishing, stuff like that, little things like that.
What about the memories of leaving Cuba? What was that like? And what do you remember feeling when you left your home?
Well, amazingly, I think for most children, regardless of the stories, and there are stories, there was the Pedro Pan. Um, you may know about the Pedro Pan project that took children from Cuba and brought them over by themselves without their parents, and put them in
Hmm.
homes waiting for their parents to come back. This was done by the Catholic Church in Miami. And there
Oh,
are many of people my age who were part of that. It was for them,
interesting.
that was a very harrowing thing. I mean, to leave your parents
Yeah.
behind. It was done, I think, because Cuba Cuba began to implement what they do in the communist countries. They started taking the children and putting them at 12 years old. The boys went into the military
Gotcha.
training. The children were told to They were very much indoctrinated. Make sure you let your teacher know what your mother and father are saying at home, kind of thing. So in order to remove them from that, the Catholic Church here in Miami began, a bishop here began that Operation Pedro Pan, which is Peter Pan, the flight.
Yeah.
And so you can read about that. There are several children's books. Cristina Diaz Gonzalez has the book The Red Umbrella, and you can read about that. But in my
I just make a
case,
note.
and I think it's the case of a lot of children, we were kind of unaware, we're going somewhere. Take your little bag and let's go. And we were not allowed to leave with much except a little bag. I had a tiny bag, a stuffed dog that got lost somewhere here in Miami between moves. I can't, I wish I would give anything to be able to find that little toy, a stuffed dog. And then you couldn't take anything with you. We came on tourist visas. There
Okay.
was still tourism at the time. So what would happen is you would come on a tourist visa,
Hmm.
and when you got here, you asked for political asylum. And that's how it worked. That's how it worked.
Got it.
So you couldn't take anything out. I mean that you couldn't take any jewelry. So my mother, I don't know why. My mother, I have a little, they had bought for me a little golden watch to give to me when I would turn 15, which was a big deal, 15. So she said, we're going to take this one. And my father was appalled. She says, no, we're going to take this one. So I was a very, very skinny girl. I mean, bones. So she stuck um, that watch, which was too big for my wrist, but it was just right for my arm. And she put the sleeve of my dress over that, and I walked through and got on the plane. And when we got here, there was the watch. But we could have gotten detained, you know, we could have gotten sent back. But she said, no, no, we're going to take this one with us. And so I still have it. So never wore it much because now it doesn't even fit on two of my fingers, it's tiny. But
Yeah.
so those were the memories. But I wasn't really, and I think a lot of the children at the time were not really too aware of what was going on, except that you were going to a different place. And
Right.
I don't think children have at that time in their lives the notion, I'm not coming back. You know,
Oh, I
that maybe
see.
that sets in maybe later, but at that moment, we're going on vacation type of thing because first of all, that's what they wanted me to say. So my parents, so no, we're going to go as a tourist. We're going to go on vacation. We had been to Miami once before when I was a little younger. And so we're going to Miami. We're going to Miami. I thought we were just going on vacation again, but then we stayed.
And you just never got back on the plane to go
No,
back
we
to
never got back.
Cuba.
No.
So do you know what happened to your house, or what about your other family members that they stayed
Oh,
behind, or?
that's an interesting story. I'll make it short. My some of my immediate family went into the house that we lived in a medium-sized town, and they went into that house. The house had been built by my grandfather when he married my grandmother in the early 20th century. So today it would be already over 100 years old if it's still there. Anyway, he built that house for her, and that's where me and my father and my mother lived. And that was the house that had the big property that had fruit trees and all kinds of things. So, I mean, it was in town, but it still had a big property. Anyway, some relatives moved in because as soon as you left your house, it was occupied by the government. It was considered abandoned, and at that moment they would take your business. They were already taking the businesses. My grandfather's business was already being told, you can stay working, but it's no longer yours. And he had built it up from the time he was 18. So houses, everything was taken over. In communist countries, there is no private property. Even today in Cuba, there is for tourism and things like that, but the citizens there's no private enterprise. There's very little, there's no private housing really. The government assigns you a house, and sometimes it's you and another family. You split it with some bricks down the middle of the house. Anyway, since it was a big house, my relatives took it over. When they left a couple of months later, I found out the the town people, the town officials took over the house. And I have heard that at first it became a jail. So these lovely floors that had been, with Spanish tile and all this stuff that had been there for 70 something years. Um, that those were brick walls were made to divide into cells. Um, it was turned into the town jail for a while. Then later I heard that from the town jail it became an orphanage. The orphanage it became a regular school. And I don't know what it is now. I don't even know if it's up. I don't know. I don't know. And I have not gone back. So I wouldn't be able to, and most of my family either left or the ones who stayed behind who were elderly passed away. So I have very little connection nowadays with Cuba, very little connection. What I have is the family that left. I have family in Venezuela. A lot of my family, my uncles and what have you, left and came to Miami, but immediately moved over to Venezuela where there was opportunities for businesses and things like that. But I have nobody in Cuba. And that's I get asked that a lot. Why haven't you gone back? And my answer is always, and my husband's too, he has not gone back. Um, what I left is probably not there anymore. It's probably all gone or completely
That's
different. So I want to keep the memories intact. I want to remember what I knew rather than what it is, because I know that what it is not exactly at all what I left behind. But I have
yeah,
good
I like
memories
that.
of the time. Yes, yes,
Yeah, I think it's a very poignant thing to say because even if you leave for like a month or 2 months, when you come back, you've changed, the space has changed. Certain nuances might feel familiar, but you're different. So maybe they're not as like, there's that subtle difference in you or the area. So I think that's a really poignant thing to say. Like, uh, to remember it as it was is better than
yes,
going back
yes,
and changing the beauty of those moments that you had. Oh,
yes.
wow. Oof. Now, what about coming to the US? What was when you got here, you arrived with your illegal watch on your wrist. What were your
I know, it was awful. So uh,
I love it. I think it's great.
the fun The fun thing about coming over here was that I came with my paternal cousins, the ones that I didn't see that
Okay.
often, but my father's side of the family, we came together. The others came later, but the
Mhm.
ones on my father's side of the family came over. So we moved into this little cluster of apartments, little tiny cluster of apartments, and so we moved next door to each other. So for the first time in my life, I had my family next door. I didn't have to go anywhere. They were there. My two cousins were there, two girl cousins. And so we were placed in the same school. We were together for a while. Later they left to Venezuela. But for a while there it was fine. When we got here, there is a beautiful building that used to be a skyscraper, not anymore, in downtown Miami, which is called the Freedom Tower. And the Freedom
Hmm.
Tower used to be an old building that was a newspaper building. It was for one of the newspapers in Miami owned it. And that became processing center. And so when you applied for
Okay.
everybody that came through, or most people that came through, now not everybody's um, experience was different. My husband had a different experience. But me, we went to that center. That was where my parents filled out the papers. They asked for political asylum for us, and I was given a little box that had red, white, and blue stripes, and inside was a little sample like you get in the hotels, a little sample soap and a toothbrush about this big and a little washcloth And, I remember that distinctly, that little box. And I kept it with me for years. And I think it probably disintegrated after so many years. But yeah, those were the things that, those were my memories. Now, my parents were over there doing important things like filling out, immigration papers. And I'm over here with my little box. And on my first Christmas here, this was November, I came in November 1960. My first Christmas, they had a toy drive, a toy giveaway. And I got a little wallet, a little vinyl wallet, and a Barbie,
Ooh.
which later I donated. I think it was when the Mariel boat lift in the 1980s, or no, it must have been before that. I donated it to other Cuban children who were coming much later when I was no longer a child. That Barbie was first edition Barbie. I sh I should have kept her because she's like $2,000 now. And
Yes.
I know I'm going, what did I do that for? But no, I gave her away. I donated her. So I remember the
You.
Barbie and I remember the box. And, those were, like I said at the beginning, I think children have a little tiny blinders type of memory of what's going on in their
Mm-hmm.
lives. The big picture doesn't interest them. And I think that's very important when we write books for children. When authors write books for children, they need to keep in mind the frame of reference that the children have, the knowledge, general. You cannot be talking about deep issues, which you may touch upon in a picture book, perhaps, or maybe a middle grade book. You can touch upon the bigger issues, but you have to introduce them slowly and put them from the child's. What would the child see? Because
That's a
I
good
remember that's
point.
what I saw.
Wow. Wow. So, okay, so now you're in this new place. Your cousins are next door, but you don't have a yard. You're in an apartment. You don't have many things. Now, there's so many questions I want to ask, but was it hard for your parents to get work? Or did they,
Yes,
yeah, I can imagine that was
yes,
difficult. Did
yes, it
they
was
speak
very
any
difficult.
English at all?
No, just broken English,
Mm-hmm.
broken English. Eventually, when my family left for Venezuela and we moved on another place of our own, we had three cousins that were sent from Cuba because the
Mm-hmm.
two boys, the parents did not have passports. They had never applied, and they
Mm.
quickly got the children's papers together and sent them over. And I had a girl cousin who was a year younger and two boy cousins that were 1 and 2 years older. So all of them came over and we
Wow.
lived in a one in a two-bedroom apartment. And the
Wow.
landlord had only rented out to my parents and me. It was a three-people apartment. It was almost like a little duplex. It had a yard. But he didn't know that the other kids were there, the other family members. Then an aunt came, so that added to it.
Oh
He
my
didn't know.
gosh.
So, or maybe he didn't know, but he rented that apartment to us. But when there was wind that he was coming, the kids hid. Everybody went into a closet. Don't let the landlord see you, because then he'll throw us out. And we also had the experience across the street. This was interesting too. There was a cluster of apartments. This was before my cousins came, and we moved there. My father, my mother, and me into an efficiency apartment, which, if you know what that is no bedroom. No bedroom. It was just a little tiny room, basically. And the owner of that cluster of apartments was a Russian Jewish Holocaust survivor.
Oh my gosh.
And she actually had a tattoo that she showed me. And she had survived the
Wow.
Holocaust and had moved to New York, met her husband, and they had come down to Florida. He passed away, and she ran. They owned that apartment building, and her
Wow.
name was Marie. And Marie loved us, and she rented us when as soon as a one-bedroom apartment opened up. Wow, we have a one-bedroom apartment. This was before my cousins came. But I have to tell you this, and this is a very sad situation. We would go see apartments for rent, and there were signs on the windows that said, no dogs, no Negroes, no Cubans.
Wow.
Now, my own children have a hard time believing that, but I saw it. I know these eyes, I saw it.
Wow.
And Marie just hated that. She just said, no, no, I'm an immigrant too. So she welcomed us into her apartments, and from then on, that's how we went. Eventually, my other aunts and uncles came and claimed their children, and everybody got settled. But for my parents to find work was hard. My father worked at a factory, and his job was loading and unloading boxes from trucks. But he loved the boss. His name was Firestone, which is, if you know the Firestone tires, this was from that family. And that man was very good to him. And he had a daughter about my age, and anything that she outgrew, I got.
Oh,
Oh boy. So that was great. My mother had a little bit of a harder time. My mother had been a lawyer in Cuba. She had a law degree.
wow.
And yes, and she was studying to become a judge just before we left.
Oh,
She
geez.
um she had a harder time, but she studied to become a teacher aide, an assistant, because there were so many Cuban children coming over all the time that they needed Spanish speaking people in the schools because nobody spoke Spanish. So they needed aides that would help the teachers in the classrooms. And so she studied that and worked at that for a while.
Wow, good for her. It's got to be kind of crazy and a little bit like demoralizing. At least that's how I would feel if I was like a lawyer and then I couldn't get a job and I'd had all this education. And just because someone doesn't understand my language, like I'm not, I'm not good enough for that role here, but in another country, like, gosh, like what a situation for them
Yes.
to
Well,
be in,
it was very
professionals.
interesting because one of the things that is still talked about, at least my generation, I mean, children and grandchildren, they know this stuff, but to them it's ancient history. But you went to any hotel in Miami Beach. That was the era of the
Hmm.
big Fontainebleau hotels and, all of these huge casino hotels. And,
Hmm.
Miami Beach was famous for those humongous, beautiful hotels. You went there, and the kitchen was full
Yeah.
of people washing dishes. They were the doctors, Cuban doctors, Cuban lawyers,
Yep.
teachers. The doctors, it was funny because, oh, I know a doctor. Yeah, but he can only see you because he would see you clandestine, he would see you on the side. But he can only see you tomorrow morning because tonight he's washing dishes in Miami Beach.
Yeah.
So and I think that's how it is with all immigrants or most immigrants, unless they come with a lot of money set aside or
Yeah.
something. But, the thing is
That's
that
a really
those
good
those
point.
professions were given the opportunity, especially doctors. I'm very grateful to the United States. I am a big patriot, and I mean that in the best sense. Let me clarify that. I'm very patriotic. I feel very strongly for this country. And I'm very grateful that they gave those doctors a lot of opportunities. They relocated them to places so that they could study and get their
Yeah.
certification back so they could work, and a lot of them did.
Good.
So,
That's good to know because you don't always hear those stories. But I kind of want to touch on that and then like the signs and that you said. I think it's interesting and again poignant and slightly poetic that the landlady of the apartment building you lived at was a Jewish immigrant who was in the Holocaust because she literally saw firsthand how hating on people is the bane of our existence. And so taking that experience and then opening her apartments to people that are different than her, but are still humans trying to make their way in the world, trying to find a better, better life or whatever it is people are looking for. They feel more safety, more security. I think those are like the unsung heroes.
yes.
Um, Like we hear so much about other people, like, my son's learning about Anne Frank in school. And so you hear all these stories, but you forget that without the neighborhood, without the community coming together, things fall apart. So if
Yes.
you didn't have like the Underground Railroad, if you didn't have, people hiding in attics in like Germany and Poland, if you didn't have this woman opening her doors, like so many people would be lost or
Yes.
homeless. And so I think that's a really important thing to highlight. And I also think what your parents experienced, having knowledge and insight and education. um I've met so many people that moved to the United States, when I lived in Dallas, for example. um there was this one cat, like Uber driver or something, and I had him like twice when I was there, by just randomly. And he was like a doctor from like Iran, but it was like impossible for him to get a job. Impossible. And he was like trying to go through all of these like hoops, and had all this experience and was so well educated, and had studied and practiced, but because he was in America and because of where he was from, it was the most difficult thing for him.
Yes.
And so I think sometimes we are very judgmental of people because they don't speak our language. I'll say that as an American, like working, for instance, in restaurants, I spent about 18 years in hospitality, but you don't know if that dishwasher is like, some kind of incredible clinician from like Vietnam or,
That's right.
Honduras or whatever.
That's
And
right.
just because he's washing dishes here because his English is broken doesn't mean he's incompetent or she's incompetent. And
Yeah.
that's part of the thing that, I mean, I'm sure I've had my moments where I wasn't kind to people, but I've always been pretty, you know, uh, open and accepting, and you work with people. And then I think that's why I've had a good experience in Spain. My karma's coming back to
Yes.
me because my Spanish
Absolutely.
is very broken.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And you're absolutely right. And I think,
Ah,
I think that's what has made, and I hate to sound like this, but I think that's really the greatness of America. The
mm,
greatness of America has never left. We don't need to make
mm,
it great again. It's been here. And I think the greatness of America has been the welcome that they have. It is a nation of immigrants. It is a nation of immigrants, except that unless you were a native, you're a Native American, and in that case, maybe you did too, because you came down the Bering Strait, through Alaska and made your way down. So you immigrated from someplace. You emigrated from someplace. But we have welcomed immigrants, and I think
mm,
immigrants have made our country, this country, they have actually made it better. Oh yes, there are those who come who are, you find anything, everything, but in at this and then at this time, I think it's very unfortunate what is happening, that you know, that this view of, well, let's welcome people to our shores. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, like it says on the Statue of Liberty. I think that that has become so, you have to defend that, which you shouldn't have to defend it. But let's hope, you know, because I think that every one of those people who come over will make, at least 99.9% of them will do something good for America. And
yeah.
you can see in countries where there's a very homogeneous population that sometimes they get very set in their ways in some
Mhm.
places, but we haven't. We've taken the experiences, all of these people. I mean, after the war, Germany lost so many good brain power, right? And where
Mhm.
did they go? They came over here and they built spaceships and did all kinds of things. So yeah, I think tolerance is uh is something that we need to maintain and continue. It bothers me sometimes that people within my own community become very intolerant of people of other communities coming over, because think about it, you did too. What would have happened if in 1960 the government here would have said, I'm sorry, but you, your mom, and your dad have to go back because we don't
Right.
want you here. So I would not have been able to live in the freedom that I've lived all my life, contribute what I have to this, what I think I have contributed to this country, my husband, my children and grandchildren. So, let's not lose sight of that. Like you say, that Uber driver, you have to
Yes,
treat him and her with respect
absolutely.
because you don't know their background. You don't know, and after all they're doing is earning an honest living to
Hmm.
get their children and move them forward and move forward with their lives. And that is the
Amen.
story of every immigrant anywhere, the Syrians and the
Absolutely.
Libyans and whoever. That is the story of an immigrant.
Hmm.
The world is always in flux, populations are always in flux since time immemorial. And
So
it's
true.
important. It's important. So I've always been very grateful that when we came over from Cuba, my parents worked hard and went through a lot, but it was always positive. It was always, it's going to be better tomorrow. Don't worry. Study hard. That was
Oh,
the one thing. Get an education.
siempre hay por
Study
mañana.
hard. Work hard. Don't get in trouble, you know? So that was what they
Mm.
instilled in me.
So, speaking of tolerance and learning and education, what was it like when you arrived to the US and was got into the school system? What was that experience like for you?
Okay. I was placed,
Dun
I
dun
was in a
dun.
Catholic school. I was in a Catholic school because, my
Oh wow.
parents, yeah, they just, public education in Cuba was being changed at the time.
Mm.
The revolution promised change. And it did change, not the way it should have been, but that's another matter. So they put me in a Catholic,
We'll
that's a
get into
different
world
tough,
politics another time.
another time. Um, my parents put me in a fifth grade in a Catholic school, and my two cousins went into the same school. They were in other grades. I was the only non-English speaker in the class.
Wow.
And there were two boys there that now I figured they're brothers, so one of them must have been held back, but I don't know which one. Anyway, they were very nice. John and Joseph Nunez. And of course they called them Nunes. So John Nunes and Joseph Nunes. And Joseph Nunes, apparently they had grandparents who had come, because we're not the first wave of immigration to the United States. I mean,
Right.
my grandmother came to the United States in 1898 to Tampa during the Spanish American War. I have a great
Oh
grandmother buried
wow.
somewhere in Tampa that I don't know where because I don't know her name. So anyway, so
Huh.
these boys knew teeny tiny little bit of Spanish. So my mother had said, "What is your name?" "My name is Sylvia." "What is your name?" So over and over, I knew that phrase. That one I knew. So Mrs. Taylor, I got this Irish American teacher, Mrs. Taylor. She had
Jeez.
fiery red hair and beautiful blue eyes, and she was the best.
Oh,
And she
thank
sat me
God.
down and she put Joseph in front. And so she says, "What is your name?" And I go, and Joseph turns around and says, "Como te llamas?" And I go, "Oh my gosh, the one thing that I knew how to answer. He blew my moment. I could have hit that kid." So I said, my name is Sylvia. I told him, I know that one. So in Spanish. So I told her, I had a wonderful teacher. It was very difficult that year because there was no Spanish. She knew no Spanish. So she would write the homework on the board. I would write it letter by letter. I would take it home. And I have a Spanish, English, English, Spanish dictionary that I still have. It's like falling apart. I don't even want to touch it. And I would translate every word and do my homework. And I ended up that fifth grade with the highest grades of all the girls in the class. Not in Spanish. I took everything in English. There was no Spanish, anything. And I got at the end of the school year, I got this little plastic trophy that says excellence, and I didn't even know what it was. And then she explained She
So
explained to my parents,
precious.
she says, well, she has straight A's. So, okay, that happened in fifth grade. By sixth grade, I mean, I was
Wow.
ready. I got that prize too. When I was in seventh grade, I got a teacher. In my first report card, I got a B in conduct. In all the, I got an A, but then I had a B in conduct. And I was like please. I was scared of my own shadow. I was very quiet, very meek, mild. And so my mother wondered, why did she give her a B in conduct? So my mother went to talk to her and she said, is she misbehaving? What is she doing wrong? And the teacher said, no, we just can't give her the excellence this year because some parents complained. So the only way that I cannot give her the prize is to make sure that she doesn't have A's in conduct. I can't take the A's away from her in the subjects, but I'm marking her down in conduct so that because the parents, American parents, complained. So my mother, being the lawyer that she
Interesting.
was, took me out of school. She went and told the priest off. She said, how dare you push my daughter down? How dare you? Took me out, put me in another
Like your
school,
mom.
and the rest is
I like
history.
her.
But no, she wasn't gonna stay. But can you imagine?
Well,
Those were
because
the
my
things.
one of my questions was, did you be like, did you meet any prejudice or racism? Because it's you know and I can still see certain things here in Spain, although where we are is very beautiful and very accepting. There's always that one person who ruins it for the group,
Yes,
so but you, you just people sometimes are like, oh, why are you here, like, like that. So I mean, did you meet, were the kids nice to you, like, was that the
the
only
kids the kids were nice to me, and I made friends,
wow,
and I
that's
was
awesome.
fine. And more little Cuban kids started to come over, so you immediately gravitated towards them. You made
Mm-hmm.
friends with them, and eventually the flood was so large that a lot of the Anglo population began to move away. So Miami right now is, I would say, 95% Hispanic. Now it's not all Cuban,
Mm-hmm.
but as Cubans began to get more leverage, in the schools and in government, there's some that became, they ran for commissioner or this or that,
Mm-hmm.
and so life eased up a little bit. But that was just Miami. If you left Miami, you still found a little prejudice, racism, and bias, which I think you still do. Um, in places, not everywhere. You hope that it's not everywhere, but there are, and it doesn't even have to be racism. There is prejudice against people with disabilities, and there's all kind. Anybody will find something to be prejudiced about against another person because that's just human nature. You put two humans in one room and you've got a conflict. I mean, that's going to happen. Eventually, they may work it out or they may not. But yes, we did find some, and it was rough. That was a little bit rough. My cousins who were in the boys went to public school. I ended up going to public school in the end and graduating and doing. I loved it. It was a wonderful experience. But the boys, when I was in the Catholic school, the boys went to the public school because who could afford? I mean, the Catholic school was $5 a month. Forget that. It was just me and the other my girl cousin. Boys, just we could not afford it. So, I mean, my father earned $50 a week, so forget that. So anyway, so they did find, and there was, being boys, high school boys, there were some conflicts
Issues.
and things like that. But I think that's true everywhere. You have bullying and things, even in places where you have a homogeneous population, because people are going to pick on
Absolutely.
things, so.
Yeah, I think I think sometimes it's innate in kids. Like, it's always that delicate balance of, you know, sometimes you need to, like, stand up for yourself, and that kid's not really being a mean or a bully. And then there's other times when it obviously is. Like, one of my friends here, her son is like half Chinese, and he goes to a public school in Valencia, and the kids have made fun of him for speaking Chinese, and English is like, I mean, Spanish is like his third language. So it's like he can speak English and Chinese fluently, and then they're picking on him because he doesn't know Spanish, and he's like, go home, and things like that. And to me, I was like, when I heard that, I was like, oh, I feel bad for this kid. And then the second thought was, oh, it's everywhere. Like, you think you find a utopia, but at the end of the
No,
day,
no.
kids are going to be kids, and if they've heard it somewhere, seen it somewhere, they're going to
Yes,
repeat it. And then you have to remember, like, they're also testing the boundaries, and
yes.
you know, and like one of my therapist, she said something to me not that long ago. She's like, if somebody's angry like at you for something, for being who you are, like how are you triggering them, so like
That's a
you
good
know
thought. That's a very
I was
good
like,
thought.
oh, I like that, because sometimes
Yeah,
I'm like, what I do, like, what I
yeah.
say, I don't understand. Maybe that's a you problem, not a me problem. Oh, it's also interesting that your parents put the girls in, you and your cousin, in the Catholic school. And I think this is, I could go down a rabbit hole with Catholicism, because there's so many, I've got so many thoughts on it. But it's almost
Yes.
like they had to keep the girls prim and proper and pristine,
Yeah,
and the boys could go fend for themselves. Like, keep the girls holy and devout,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and then the boys will be fine, because boys
Yes,
will be
yes,
boys.
yes.
But
Boys will be
you need to
boys.
be a good girl. Oh,
Yes.
that's really interesting. Um, what so you're seeing this with your parents, and um struggling, I don't know if they were totally struggling, but not in the jobs that they were, qualified for. You're moving into, what was your thought process then? And then how has that mentality changed, based on their decision to leave? So what could you internalize as a 10-year-old, your parents making the decision, versus now in retrospect? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? What I'm asking?
I
Yeah.
think I do. I think I do. To me, like I said at the beginning, the problems with one kid not liking me, or me not speaking English, were small things that were personal things. I didn't,
Hmm.
even that sign that said no Cubans, no dogs, no Negroes, because we have to remember that the Civil Rights Act was not signed until 1964.
Yeah.
We've been very slow, very slow. The Civil War that ended slavery was 1864, and it took 100
Right.
years for us to be able to get something in the books that everybody's equal. Um,
Crazy.
those, for to me, they were personal things. They were vignettes, but
Hmm.
I know that my parents were struggling now thinking about how old they were, having to start over again. Um, and should they have done what they did, which was leave the country? Um, I don't think they had a choice, because their businesses were being intervened. That's the word. They were intervened, meaning taken over. Um, and at first, um, it didn't seem. It seemed like it was just going to be one more. Cuba was just one coup d'etat after another. It was just, if a president was legally elected, it didn't last. So I think at the beginning they thought that was what it was, and what my parents would always, they lived, was, we're going back. We're going back soon. The Marines are going to go over there, and they're going to take care of it. The Americans have always taken care of it. And so I think the big shock was when Castro turned away from the United States and allied himself with the Soviet Union. And I mean, the Soviet Union saw its chance. They had a base 90 miles from the American shore. And they had a person who was going to do everything they said. And there was that missile crisis and all that historical stuff. So they began to realize, I think a few years later, that we were not going back. But the talk at the beginning was, oh, no, no, no. No, we're not going to, no, let's not do that. Don't buy a house. Even if you could afford it, don't buy a house, because next year we're going to go back to Cuba. We're going to be having Nochebuena next year in Cuba. We're going to be, that was their mentality. For the children, like myself and my cousins, time is relative. Nochebuena was coming, but yeah, you don't think about, oh well, this is the time frame. No, what am I doing tomorrow, and what do I have for homework, and what am I eating for lunch? That kind of thing.
You're so right.
Yeah, they're very immediate.
Uh-huh.
They're very immediate. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, so to me it sounds like when your parents made the decision, you always thought you were going back.
Yes.
And you couldn't be concerned about that just going back because you were just doing now, and that's all you could do as a kid. So was there ever like a moment of clarity where you're like, oh, I'm going to stay in America? And then, or was it just like this gradual acceptance for you?
I think it was a gradual acceptance, and my life began to evolve here.
Mm,
School, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go to school? Where am I going to go to college? Then I met my husband. Okay. So, I going back was for me was not so much an enticement
mm,
as it may have been for my parents. And even for
right.
them, like I said, the family had left. So they had very little over there.
Understand.
My grandfather on my mother's side passed away. We didn't see him again, the one with the hat and the guayabera. And we brought my grandmother and my aunts over, and they lived here. I mean, life I think it's the way it is with every immigrant that you see. For example, you see the old pictures and the old videos, those fast black and white videos of New York City, and the
Yeah.
streets teeming with the peddlers and everything. Everybody was just trying to get through the day. We were trying to get through the
Yeah.
day. They were, like I said, becoming more active in the community. The younger parents, people who came younger, like in their 20s or late teens, began to look at their future here rather than their future over there. It was a
Mm,
mess. In 1963, after that Bay of Pigs invasion, they they he closed the airports. Castro
yeah.
closed the airports. There was no back and forth. There was no flying over. There was no coming over for a long time. It got opened. There was a plan called the Family Reunification Plan that was devised by the United States, only with Cuba. And who knows what goes on behind closed doors, what you had to give, and who knows. But
Hmm.
but he Castro was riding high with the Soviet Union. He didn't need the United States because the Soviet
Right.
Union was powerful at the time. So that family reunification made it possible for people to start bringing their loved ones over. And then once you had your parents here and your grandparents here and, your brothers and sisters or whatever, aunts and uncles, you kind of made a life for yourself. And eventually, with Cuba in particular, not so much with the other countries, but with Cuba in particular, there have been one law after another. There was the wet foot, dry foot law, which you may not know. Okay. That
I think I
is,
might, but please explain. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yes. Well, in the 1980s, there was a Mariel boat lift. If you ever
Hmm.
want to read something interesting, the Mariel boat lift was incredibly interesting. And a group of people stormed the Peruvian embassy and wanted out. So because it was a Peruvian embassy, it was the Cuban government couldn't go in there. So those people were lifted out, and then Castro said, "You want them? You can have them." And this was Jimmy Carter's administration, and people, just anybody that could get into a boat and make it to Florida got into a boat, and 140,000 people, I think, came in 2 weeks. It was incredible. I think that's where I gave my Barbie away. Anyway,
Yeah,
so
probably.
yeah, so it was a free for all. They were the Mariel boat lift, and people were hiring boats from here and going over there and getting their relatives and bringing them back, because Castro, and he, unfortunately, he also opened up his prisons. And yes, some of the people that were in prison, although he kept some, but the ones who were like government dissidents, he let them go, but he also let go the criminals. So a lot of murderers and thieves and people who were in prison for criminal acts, not because they had been against the government, they also came over at that time. So there was a big to-do here in Miami. Oh my God, all these people are coming. So then fine, after that, it was the wet foot, dry foot. In other words, people came in whatever they could find. They sneak out at night from the island. It's only 90 miles to Key West.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So they
yeah.
went, yeah. So they went and they made it. And if you set foot on American soil, you stayed.
Good. You're
That's
good.
where the
Yep.
dry foot came in.
Mm-hmm.
But what
Yep.
people don't realize is that a lot of lives were lost. A
A
lot of
lot of people
people
died.
never made it. Never made it. And we don't even know how many never made it, because I don't think that there's any numbers on that.
No, I don't think so
But
either.
it was very
I lived in
sad.
Key West for a while, so yeah, there was a big thing, and there's like a big old, old buoy at the very southern end, the southernmost point. I'm sure you're
Yes,
familiar with it.
yes.
It
That's the
says 90
southernmost
miles.
point. Yes, yes,
Was like, we just get a boat and go there.
yeah.
Like,
Basically, you know what?
we
There
can
was a
check it out,
ferry.
maybe. There
My
used to be,
my
right?
My husband's family used to come every year for vacation, and they would take the ferry from Havana, get into their car, put the car in the
Yeah.
ferry, and the ferry would land in Key West, and they would get into their car and move, and
And
then they would drive
drive.
to New York, or they used to go to the Adirondacks for a week, and
Wow.
so yeah, that was pre-revolution, you know. So I mean, I didn't, but his family did. So
Good for him. So now in like retrospect, did have you gained any more insight or learned something new about your parents' decision to leave Cuba, or have you had any like what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say rectification, that's not right. But like, is there something else that has come to light later in life that you didn't understand as a kid for this big process?
no, because I understood later in life why they came.
Mm-hmm.
I understood why they came. Um, had they stayed, like some people did stay, they would have regretted it the way that people have regretted it that stayed,
The state, yeah.
especially after they closed the flights for quite a few years. Um, Life in Cuba is terrible at this moment, because
Mm,
while the Soviet Union was supporting the island, it was, it was receiving a lot of help from them.
right.
Um, Cuba has, like I said, it has very large natural resources, very good natural resources, but they have to be managed correctly.
Mm,
You cannot put 12-year-old boys out there cutting sugar cane, because that doesn't work. So it's been so mismanaged. And then the Soviet Union fell apart. So now we don't have a Soviet Union. They had no backing. And so they are in such dire distress. Uh, I have a lot of American friends who travel as tourists. There are cruise ships and what have you.
right.
And they say, "Oh, we had a wonderful time. Oh, the people were so nice and we ate well." Well, that's what they want you to see. If
Right.
they don't, you can't travel the island. There's no permit to travel the island. You go to a little cluster in Havana that has the buildings are repainted, and food goes to the restaurants that are there. The hospitals have a wing for foreigners and a wing for citizens. The wing for citizens does not have, most of the time, air conditioning or supplies. So people from here have to send like sutures to their parents or their family over there that is having surgery. While the foreigners, you know, for $340 you can have a wonderful facelift with good doctors, because there are good doctors. So I try to tell
Wow.
my friends, I try to tell my friends, and that's another reason why we have not gone back. I will say to them, you, that's the only thing that supports the economy, is this tourism that's very controlled. The rest of the island is shambles. They lose electricity. I have a picture there of Havana the other day, a blackout like there is every night, every day. Blackout. Forget that at night they have no electricity during the day either. They get 2 hours sometimes. So they have to time their cooking. And there's 3 beautiful hotels that are all lit up, and the rest of the city is totally black, totally dark. And that's how it is. So the question was, did I question them coming over here? At first I didn't, because I made a life. I started as a child. I think for people who came in their teens may have been a little bit more difficult, or a little bit older. Maybe they may have had a rougher time getting themselves going here. But me as a kid, I was fine. But I put myself in their place, and I think they did the right thing for me and for themselves. As sad as it is, but I think they did the right thing. It you know, the island is on the verge of collapse, and now we have that they're sending back a lot of people, and I know a lot of people who are still trying to bring their families. There's a lot of new Cubans here. They don't speak English at all. They just arrived maybe a year ago. There's another program called Parole, in which, for example, if I have a business, I can say to one of these people who have family over there, I guarantee that I'm going to give your cousin a job. So he fills out papers over there, she fills out papers over here, and I am guaranteeing that person's job. That's no longer. That's gone. So that was up to about a month ago, and it's gone now. So did they make the right decision? Yes. It was sad, but yeah, it is. I try to keep you. One of your questions was how do I keep the culture
Yeah, yeah,
alive? Well,
yeah.
you keep it through music. My
Mm.
children are familiar with Cuban music. They all know how to dance,
Oh, good.
except my
I love
husband.
that.
So I dance with the kids. Anyway, but he loves Cuban music. My husband is he just, you name anything and he'll tell you the name of and who plays, but he won't dance. Anyway, um, music, food. We have the traditions. Nochebuena, the 24th. We have a big meal. Um, um, Different traditions. We still have, you know, some of the things that we used to do. And there's the love of family, which I think is universal. The love of family, the caring for the older people, the caring for the elderly, and making sure that everybody's okay. You know, and then, you know, it used to be that we we would stick very close together, and now I have one child in Atlanta and another in Indianapolis and one here. So I have them all over the place. So
Yeah, it
luckily
does make
there's
it difficult, doesn't
airplanes.
it? I know, right? So is there any specific, just to highlight some of the cultural aspects, like is there a style of dance that's like from Cuba, and like talk about the food because I love the food. So
Okay, the
dime
style
más.
of dance. There's modern salsa. You know, there's the
Hmm.
salsa, which is fine. There's the reggaeton and salsa. You know, there's fine. There's new artists, very talented people all the time coming up with new music. The old-fashioned music. There was a
Mm.
danzón, which was a special type of music that was around the time of the 1800s, and
Hmm.
my grandmother taught me how to dance the danzón. There was a there's some wonderful music, um, wonderful performers, old performers. I have all their stuff. Uh, I'm trying to think. Well, the cha 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 was big when I was about 9, 10 years old. Um, there's always the conga. I love the conga, which is actually all over. It's not necessarily Cuban, but it's all Afro. It's Afro-Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the types of music. And then the food, we eat, I think, a little bit more pork than other people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I just made picadillo yesterday, which is the ground beef with the Cuban spices.
Mm.
Cuban spices are oregano, cumin. Cumin is in
Yeah,
everything.
love cumin.
And bay leaf and, things like that. Onions
Mm-hmm.
and garlic and green
Yeah.
peppers. Yeah. And frijoles negros, black
Sí, mi
beans, Cuban
favorito.
style. I make those too. I'm not a very good cook, but there's a couple of things. There's flan. I make flan for Christmas.
What
Um,
about ropa vieja?
ropa vieja. I used to make it all the time, but it's just time, it's
Yeah,
it's
it takes a
kind of
while.
a time consuming dish. I'd rather buy it, but
I just eat it. I just
I
eat
just
it.
go and buy it. Somebody's making it. That's fine. Bring it home. But yes, we eat that. We eat a lot of that. Chicken, prepared arroz con pollo, a good arroz
Yo,
con
sí.
pollo. Yeah. So those are the dishes that are plantains, the fried plantains. Okay.
So good.
Oh, I know. The
So
sweet ones
good.
and then the ones that are
Yeah.
like yeah, mashed.
The smashed one.
Delicious.
Oh, I love those ones. My son will only eat this the sweet ones, fried
Uh-huh.
plantains. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He loves those. But anything else, no. Now you, because this, I don't think this was in the questions, but just something I thought of as an educator living in the Miami area for the majority of your life. Have you seen or witnessed any changes in the immigration processes, or have you had any students that you've had to work with specifically um, to kind of adjust? Because the obviously the immigration process has changed drastically, and especially since the 60s in particular. So I'm just curious to know like what your experience now being an immigrant, but also witnessing the population around you shift.
Sure. As far as the students are concerned, there is the ESOL programs that are all over the country. English is a second
Mm-hmm.
language. ESL, ESOL.
Mm-hmm.
And the ESOL programs are meant to introduce a newly arrived student. Doesn't have to be Hispanic, can be from any
Mm-hmm.
country. A newly arrived student and get them accustomed a little bit to the school and then put into regular classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it works well. It may be on the cusp of being eliminated, or at least modified. I
Mm-hmm.
think it worked very well. I worked with a lot of ESL students in the schools where I worked. Um, in some cases, you could see that it was very, very much needed.
Mm-hmm.
And in other cases, you could see that the child in about 3 months was ready for the regular classroom. It also had
Oh
to do a
wow.
little bit with the level of education of the parents.
Mm.
You had parents who are coming over. I know parents that came over, children in my school. They were both doctors,
Mm-hmm.
and they put the child in the school, and the child in about 3 months was in regular class because these parents were highly educated, highly motivated, and they were struggling, but at the same time they were studying renew their licenses or whatever. So you could see the atmosphere in the house. And then there were others who had come from a very poor family, and not necessarily only Cuban. We had children who had crossed the border on foot
Oof.
and had spent 3 months walking. We had
Yeah.
children who had, and I'm talking a little bit before, not, now situation has
But
changed
still.
now with the new ICE and the new laws. But before, there were immigrant children walking through from Central America. And some
Mm-hmm.
of them came from um, places where it wasn't even Spanish. It was a dialect. It was it was
Yeah.
a native dialect. So they were alingual. They did not speak English.
Wow.
They did not speak Spanish. They only spoke a certain dialect. And so I remember that the school system here in Miami was looking for teachers' aides that spoke those dialects to
Wow.
help with those children. So that's how the situation with the children in schools are. I loved working
Mm.
with them. I loved they were, they were wonderful kids, new ones every year. That is a program that works well. You cannot retain those children. I think it's wrong to retain them too long in the program because then they don't integrate well. The longer you keep them in there. But for an introduction to the school, how it works, you have to line up, you have to wait for your lunch. This is what you do because some of the children have not done that. If the parents have been in hiding, whatever, they have not been exposed. So I think that that's in education what we're facing right now. In some communities, it's very um, much more than in others. In some border communities, uh, that happens a lot more. And so the resources have to be allocated. I understand resources have to be allocated to serve those children. But in Miami, because we have such a large Hispanic population, if they come from any Hispanic country or Spanish speaking country, there's a lot of resources for them.
But I think it's really important to highlight that shift, though. Like, obviously wasn't the ESOL program when you immigrated 60 years ago. That was put in place later because of the influx of Spanish speaking, or I should just say immigrants in general. But considering that Mexico and Cuba and other countries that all speak Spanish, I'm sure that had a big thing to do with it. But I'm not certain on that. But and then just seeing how that shift and how that influx impacts the school and the kid and all of those things.
Yes.
I think it's important to highlight how things have changed because it wasn't that way 60 years ago. Now, the other thing I want to kind of get your opinion on is for people who haven't left their country, who, live an American who's lived in, middle America their whole life, or for me, like if I was still in Baltimore, if I never left Baltimore, what would you want somebody like that to understand about the immigrant story and journey, for lack of a better term?
You mean from that person immigrating?
Yeah, no, so like if, for somebody who's never left their homeland or even like their home state, I have a lot of friends who may have traveled, but they've never lived outside the same state, some the same city. Um, and not saying that any of my friends personally are like prejudiced or ill-informed or anything like that. But for some people who might be closed-minded or, maybe just ill-informed, what would you want someone like that to understand about immigration and the people who immigrate, generally speaking, from your experience?
Okay. Well, I think it's sad when people don't travel. I realize that not everybody has the same opportunities, but
Mm-hmm.
travel, I think there's that show by Joseph Rosendo, and he always closes with the Mark Twain quote that travel is um, is lethal, or another word, and he uses another word, to prejudice and bigotry. And I think when you travel and you go somewhere else, you begin to realize that there are people there that may look different, may talk different, and act different, but they're just as good as you are. And you need to accept and respect. It doesn't even take, for an American, it doesn't even take to go abroad. Because if an American comes here to Miami or goes to California or New Mexico or Arizona and leaves the beaten path and goes and looks at how communities live in those places that are Hispanic communities that have been there for 3 or 4 generations, and immerse themselves and look at those communities and find the beauty in those communities, I think you cannot but help to get your mind open. Um, we are we have a tendency to get very comfortable with what we're comfortable with. Very,
True.
and it happens with, forget Americans, like you say, living in the same town. People who have never left Miami, they have no idea what is out there, and they don't know. And so for them, it's an experience. I have two grandchildren, one leaving next year and one leaving the year after that, and they're going to go to school in New England. And I'm ecstatic. I'm ecstatic that they're having this opportunity, because to me,
Hmm.
they've never lived outside well, one lives in Atlanta, which is a totally different situation. She is a
Right.
lot more exposed. It's a very cosmopolitan city. But the
Yeah.
other one, who has not left Miami, I think that they're going to be very enriched by their experience living there and going to school there. Um, I tried to send my children away to school. My my parents would not let me go. I lived in North Miami. The University of Miami is in the little Coral Gables area, the small, like
Yeah.
over here in the south. It was like maybe 30 minutes. Oh, that was too far. You can't go to the University of Miami. It's too far. You're going to be driving every day 30 minutes. What's wrong with you? So I had to go across, basically around the corner, which was fine.
That's so funny.
I didn't mind. I know, oh, they were terrible. But then again, I think to myself, and it's what you're saying, they had only been here for 8 years
Yeah.
when I started college. So their mind was in another place, in another era.
Mm,
But
that's true.
I wanted my children to be exposed. One went to Pennsylvania, then the other one went to Georgia. So one went to Tallahassee. I wanted them to be exposed to other groups, and it was a great experience for them. So people that don't ever get out of their own little environment, they need to, that's one of the things that would benefit them the most. And that is why diversity in children's books is so important. I belong to a group called We Need Diverse Books. I belong to the Latinx Kid Lit books. I belong to another one called Las Musas. We are all organizations. These are all organizations that promote multiculturalism,
Mm.
bilingual. My books are bilingual, most of my books. And I have a conference next week in West Palm Beach, and I'm going to be moderating a panel on
Oh, that's
bilingual
awesome.
books. What is the advantage of bilingual picture books, especially if you introduce children at a young age that there are different groups out there, that they have
Hmm.
beauty, that they have beautiful music, beautiful food, like you asked about the Cubans, that they
Yeah, I
have
love it.
great customs, lovely outfits. I mean, really, and
Yeah.
people who are just as nice as you are, then I think those children grow up with a mind that's a little bit more open.
Yeah.
And when it comes time for them to, to become adults and choose and go places, they will be less prejudiced and less biased than if you've never seen anything else. And so if you can't go from out of your hometown because you live in rural Iowa, but you can get those diverse books, you're being exposed.
You're traveling in a different way. That's a really good point of view. And then okay, so this is kind of going back, but how did you maintain the Spanish language for your kids? Did you ensure that they learned it, or because I know sometimes there's times, so going from my family experience, I just realized that like my grandfather's brother can speak fluent Italian. So my great great grandparents immigrated in the early 1900s from Italy, from my mom's side, and so my grandfather, my mom's dad, is Italian. Both of his grandparents are first generation Italian Americans. So I just realized that all the kids could at least understand Italian. Um, my the youngest can speak it, my uncle Michael, but it didn't really go beyond that. And sometimes, like, there in culturally, when you're trying to assimilate to a new country, especially at that time in like the early 1900s, um, it was frowned upon for you to
Yes.
speak your native tongue. So, which I find like like that's a travesty to me. I'm like, why give me sorry Italian? Like, what did you guys do to me? Oh, the horror. So like, I'm mortified. But at the time, like they wanted to assimilate. So how did you navigate that with your family? Is the question.
Yes. 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 That's a very good question. My the oldest one is always more exposed to the language because you
Yeah.
talk to them in Spanish or whatever. Now, having said that, my husband is Cuban, but he spoke fluent English at home because his mom and her sisters had a nanny that taught them English. So they spoke English a
Okay.
lot, perfect English at home. And so my husband and his sister knew from, perfect. I had to learn it, but he knew it. Now, when we had kids, you try very hard. The first one you speak to her in Spanish. The second one, that one speaks to her in English. you know. So, and the third one, forget it. I mean, but you know what? We made it a point. They would speak in English, and very often, and we fall into English a lot, or Spanglish.
Yeah.
And
I love
oh yeah, that's
Spanglish.
the
I can do
word. That's the word,
Spanglish.
Spanglish. And so, whichever word comes first to your mind, that's the one. So, we tried, but I
Funny.
did try very hard. My son resisted it a lot. He was in a
Mm.
school where he took very heavy duty Spanish, and he still resisted it. Okay, so they went off, and the Spanish has served them no end. My middle daughter, who works for the CDC, when she first started, she was the only Spanish speaker in her department, and she would write to me. She'd say, "Mom, they want me to translate this. Is this right? Look at this." I'm going, okay. My son, who when he moved to Indiana for his wife's career, he picked out that Spanish that he knew, and now he's very fluent. He and his wife
Wow.
have made it a point. Those are my two youngest grandchildren. They're 10, 11, and 6. And they speak fluent Spanish
It's
because the
amazing.
parents speak to them in Spanish at home.
Yeah.
And I realize when I go visit, sometimes I'll fall into English a lot, and then I catch myself, and we go back to Spanish.
Very
However,
cool.
the one in Atlanta who has one child, she went to a bilingual school up to high school and understands and speaks. And when she needs it, it's there. She's not
Yeah.
fluent, but when she needs it, she's there. Her father is Nicaraguan,
Okay.
and now she's been chosen for the Nicaraguan soccer team under
Oh
17. I
wow.
know,
That's
I know,
incredible.
I know. So she's been down there with him a couple of times, and the last time, she's had to speak it.
Wow.
She's had to speak it. That's all there is to it. And
Yeah.
she learned the Nicaraguan national anthem and stood there and sang it. And I'm going, oh my God, and we're watching her on TV. We just go, oh my God, look at this. She's singing it. And then the ones that live here, surprisingly, speak less. They got so used to speaking their father is American, but he was raised in Brazil. They know a little tiny bit of Portuguese, but their Spanish is very poor. But my daughter worries about it. And then I told her, look, when she needs it, it's going to come back. At some
Yeah.
point, she's heard all these words. She knows all this stuff. So when
Yeah.
she needs it, she's going to use it.
That's what I tell
So,
myself. It's gonna
yes.
come out one day.
No, it didn't come out. Well, it was a generation removed, remember? It was a generation removed. But I bet you that if you took up Italian right now,
Yeah.
you might have a little less of a difficult time than somebody who's never been exposed to it at all.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes because I'm like, with all the Spanish I've been studying, like I should be fluent by now. Like there's no way. And so my one friend was like, well, maybe you're just not genetically predisposed to it. Like maybe you should try Italian and then maybe Spanish will come easier. And I was like, I hate that you're smart. Maybe
Absolutely.
because they say it is like ingrained in your DNA, you
Very
know? So
much, very much.
like maybe,
And
maybe
you make
anyway.
connections between Spanish and Italian. We're watching a
Yeah.
show right now, Montalbano, the young Montalbano. It's an Italian. Yeah, it's an we my husband and I like detective stories, and we like European detective stories. What British mysteries? Oh
Okay.
yeah, French, the French. Oh wow, the Paris murders and all that stuff. And the Italian one that we're watching right now, of course, I mean I have to have the captions. But as I'm
Well,
listening to it, even my husband, and he's not language prone, he speaks it perfectly, but he's not. And he said, wow, I can understand a lot. I said, yeah, it's very similar. So it would
yeah,
help
there's
you.
I'm probably would. I don't know. We'll have to see. I don't want to overload my brain too much.
You won't. You
I
won't. You
don't
won't.
know. Oh, is there any advice you would offer to people who are coping with immigration issues or frustrations or anything else that you feel is vital to this conversation?
Well, if
Very
you
open-ended.
if you
You're
talk
welcome.
if you're thinking of the people who are becoming immigrants, or as you know, you said expats, that's a
Hmm.
different. I don't know if you consider expats and immigrants. I think they're a little different, right? An expat
Hmm.
sometimes does it for a purpose, and I don't know, maybe they're the same thing. I don't know. Um, Usually immigrants will try to settle permanently and maybe apply for in some cases asylum and things like that in the new country. Expats just settle in a new country. We have a lot of people from the United States that, for example, go retire in Costa Rica because
Hmm.
it's a wonderful life and they can still get all their Social Security and Medicare benefits over there. And, so um, advice. Um, it, dep- it depends on who you are. Again,
Yeah,
if you're
so true.
meaning to settle someplace, it's nice to be near communities that are like you because you get
Mm,
support. And eventually, your children may move out. You may even move away from those communities. But at first, the support from the communities is very, very important. Um, if you're just moving somewhere because you would like to live in a different place, that's fine too. You may not need that community support. And I feel for immigrants all the time. I see
mm,
desperate families. A lot of those shows that I was telling you about deal with, you know, a family that's been somebody in their family is found murdered, and then you find out that it is a hate crime and things like
yeah.
that. I feel for people who are trying to make a better life for themselves, because isn't that what everybody wants? Isn't that what everybody wants for themselves and their child and their children and grandchildren? You want to give them your best, the best that you can. And sometimes you're in a situation like the Middle East or something where there's no hope in some places. It's a hopeless place that you may be living in. You've got the Gaza and Israeli problem. You've got so many things. I feel for Haiti. Haiti is just right here across the pond, basically from us.
Yeah.
It's in shambles. So I feel for people there who want nothing better than a comfortable and peaceful life.
Yeah.
And if it takes for you to immigrate to do that, then by all means, by all means, as long as you do, wherever you go, you do honest work and you follow the laws, you're going to be an asset to that country, whatever it
I
is.
love that you said that. I love that you said that because it's like for us, like our visas and whatnot, it's like you're not trying to go out and cause trouble. Like you want to fly under the radar. Like you just want to put your head down and get through the day and not cause any trouble and not create any problems because like just
Exactly.
don't because you might not understand things either. Like for us, like we moved here because my son's father couldn't live in the U.S. anymore, and I'm not fluent in Spanish. I love the culture. I love, but you don't know what they're saying or what you need to do. You don't know all the rules. You don't know all the history. So you're just like, okay, don't cause any problems.
Right, right.
Yeah. So I think that's a misconception. It's like, everybody who immigrates or wants to, is a bad person. It's like, no, like a lot of people just
No,
trying to do their thing, trying to
right.
keep things together, and sometimes it's just
Can you blame
missing,
them? You can't blame people
yeah,
for that. You can't. You
no,
have to understand that everyone wants the same thing. We want a
mm-hmm,
peaceful home, the opportunity to work, an education for
mm-hmm,
our children. That's another thing too, because in the United States, the public education system is excellent. Now,
mm-hmm.
the Department of Education just got dismantled. So there's a lot of things changing here.
Oh man. All right, is there anything else we didn't know we needed to know about
I think we've
life,
covered a
liberty, and the
lot.
pursuit of happiness?
We've covered a lot. We've covered a
You
lot. Yeah.
sure
Yeah.
have, Sylvia. Oh, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, Sylvia. It's always a joy. It's always a pleasure. You're just incredible. I'm the mom who knows nada. This is Sylvia Lopez. Oh, actually, could you share your website with us? So if
Of
anybody wants
course.
to check out some of your bilingual books and things of
Right.
that nature, that'd be really great.
It's
So
very easy. It's sylvialopezbooks.com.
perfect. Sylvia Lopez, you can find her at sylvialopezbooks.com. I'm the mom who knows nada.